So this is Baruch Fleischman here at the Tikkun Elevator Kollel, and we're going over Jewish astrology, a cosmic science. So let's go back to a little bit of a review from what we said last time. So he said, let us review this again so we will not forget it. There are 4 directions, 4 ruchos, 4 different atmospheres. I'm not sure what this means, but he says they're boundaries, which are east, west, north, and south. East is Tiferes, and he's going to explain these 4 sides are connected with 4 elements. So how this goes, I'm not sure how this, but this is the arrangement that is coming out, he says, from the Mukhstimah of Aragonpin. They are air, fire, water, and earth, and with the main 4 lower spheros. It's also the main 4 lower spheros, which was called Chagdam. That's how you would say it, Chagdam. Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferes, and Malchus, which are Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferes, and Malchus. And they are connected to the 4 letters of God's name, and that means that each letter is going to be connected to a different element. And now you have to know the connection to all of the different constellations because they are connected with what is going on in the upper worlds. Now the upper worlds mean the source of what's manifest in this world. And Rabbi Moshe Cordovero goes on to explain that each of these 4 elements has different qualities. For example, fire is going to be hot and dry because the nature of fire is to dry things, heat. Because it's so hot, it burns out all the moisture, all liquid, in anything. So it makes things dry. And earth is dry too, but it's also cold. And water is cold and moist. And air is hot and moist. So each element has 2 qualities, and these 2 qualities switch within each one. Fire and air are both hot. One is dry and hot, and the other is moist and hot. Water and earth are both cold, but again, earth is dry, while the other, water, is moist. So we see some basic ideas what to do with them. That's the question. So he says there's a big idea in Kabbalah which I want to explain. The idea is connected to astrology, which we have already talked about, and I would like to base it on the Torah. In the Torah, there are 2 different types of commandments which a person has to fulfill in this world. One type of commandment is what is called positive commandments, while the other type is called negative commandments. In other words, a positive commandment is to do something positive, to do a mitzvah, to do a good deed. And the Torah and the Torah, and after that the Talmud, lists all the positive commandments and explains them, as well as the negative commandments, and there are plenty of them, plenty of each. So, for example, a positive commandment can be the deed of visiting someone who's sick, or the deed of giving a person a proper burial, putting on tefillin in the morning. All sorts of things which are positive commandments, that you have to go out and do them. So, he says, this is one type of commandment. And on the other hand, there are negative commandments, commandments which forbid something to you. And you have to try to refrain from doing them. For example, you shouldn't commit adultery. You shouldn't steal, and you shouldn't kill, and you shouldn't eat non-kosher food. And all the commandments of this kind are what are called negative commandments, where you have to refrain from doing something which is forbidden. So, regarding the nature of fire, I'd like to say that some of those commandments are connected to fire and air, which are the hot elements, while some of the commandments are connected to the cold elements, which are water and earth. So, for example, let's say like this, the fire people, someone in Aries or something like that, have horoscopes which are very hot. So what is going to be the main problem? Such a person's main problem is going to be how to refrain themselves from doing something which is forbidden, from transgressing and doing a forbidden deed. Because what? Such a person is more heated up. Such a person has too much heat in their body, and they are too much of a hot-headed person, which means they act before they think. In other words, their nature is to do something right away. They don't like to think about things, and when something comes into their head, they just do it. So when they get angry, say for example, let me get this lined up right now. So when they, for example, they are likely to express their anger by harming someone. So what I'm trying to say is that when somebody has too much fire in him, for example, a real fanatic, for example, that is if he has a lot of fire signs in his horoscope, then it will be very hard to hold him back, very hard for him to control himself. So many times when they get into contact with something, and there is a commandment to refrain from doing that thing, it would be very challenging for them to understand it and refrain from doing that thing. On the other hand, it would be very easy for them to do something which is positive. That is to say that it would be very easy for such a person to fulfill a positive commandment because the word in Hebrew is there's rezim. There's an urgency to what they do because the fire that burns. This is because their nature is heated up and they live an active life and want to do things. So the idea of going out and doing things would not be much of a challenge for them. And in general, in this world, such people are likely to be active, outgoing, and doers. So he says, and in general, such people don't have much of a problem going out and doing things, not only regarding the positive commandment, but generally they like to initiate things. They're starters. But regarding refraining from doing things, this is very difficult for them. And there is also going to be a difference between the hot elements of fire and air. Because, of course, the fire is going to be hotter. So a person who has more fire elements within him would find it more difficult to refrain from doing things. Because there are always different degrees, and you always have to look at things in terms of degrees. So, for example, the air has some degree of heat to it, but it doesn't have the same degree of heat as the sun. For instance, so a person who has more fire signs within him is expected to be more into this nature of wanting to go out and do things. So he would like to go out and initiate more than somebody, say, who is everything in their air signs, and we will talk about this. He says, and again, the same thing applies when you talk about the cold signs. The cold signs are, of course, earth and water. So, and they are feminine signs. So it wants to say that there are two masculine signs and two feminine signs. And what's the point of this? Whatever is coming out from the will of the Ein Sof Baruch Hu, as if it's possible to say that, their opposites appear. So here we say we have things that are male, and we have signs which are female. So maybe we can talk about this. Let's see. The masculine signs, their nature are their hot signs. And the feminine signs are cold. And again, the colder the signs the more opposite the person will be from one who has the hot signs. So if you're full of one kind of sign, because the nature of the cold signs and the cold planets are the opposite from the hot ones. This is male and female. So people who have the cold signs strong have more of the ability to restrain themselves from doing things. They have the power of self-restraint, the power of holding themselves back. And what do we say in English? There is an expression stating that a person freezes up. And a person who freezes up means a person who can't act, and that's what coldness does. If you're ever around people who are really rich maybe for a few generations and lots of money, they don't really motivate it to have to do, but they're kind of cool. That's what I think. So a person who has everything in earth and water is expected to have a problem. What's that problem? Which is similar to the problem of the person who has everything in fire and water, fire and air, but is the exact opposite. They will not have the ability to act. It'll be very difficult for them to get up and do anything, so they will have difficulty in doing the positive commandments. Such a person would often be too lazy or too tired, or would not feel like acting, because such people just freeze up. They are too cold by nature. They don't have that warmth and that tendency to do things. But on the other hand, they would find it easier to hold themselves back and refrain from doing what one is commanded not to do. They hold themselves from transgressing what we call negative commandments. They said, in other words, let's say, I read it a little bit off, they hold themselves back from transgressing what we call negative commandments. They hold themselves from doing wrong deeds. So they hold back. And the same thing is going to be in regular life. People who have all their signs in earth and water are not likely to do anything. They are likely to be too lazy. And of course, with earth signs, which are colder, it's expected to be more so than with water signs. The earth is very cold by nature, more than water, because it is cold and dry. So it has more of a cold nature than the water. So he says, let's keep going on now, and let us get back to the text. So in the text, I think he's talking about over here, the Ramak, Rabbi Moshe Cordovero. So in the text it says that fire is hot and dry because the nature of fire is dryness. Because fire consumes and evaporates all the moisture within something, the heat takes out all the water. Earth, on the other hand, is dry and cold. Water is cold and moist, and air is hot and moist. And you have to know that fire and water are opposites, and that is from two aspects. Water is cold and fire is hot. Water is moist and fire is dry. So in other words, fire and water are opposites from two sides. Fire is hot and dry again, and water is cold and moist. So he says like this, how can fire and water, be joined together? This is an important secret now. This is in astrology and in Kabbalah, and over here, which Rabbi Moshe Cordovero is going to teach you now. So the question is, of course, how are they connected? So the answer would be that in one way they are connected by air, in another way they're connected by earth. Now, what does that mean? How does that work? He's going to explain. And also air and earth are opposites from two sides. The air is hot and the earth is cold. And also the air is moist and the earth is dry. And they are joined together through water and fire. Now, how does that work over here? So we have air and earth, which don't go together. But he says they go together through water and fire. Now, how does it work? How do they join together? The air completes and joins together with these two completely opposite signs, opposite things. Water, which is wet, with fire, which is hot, because the air is hot and moist. He says, which is hot because that is air, is hot and moist. So you see that air is equal to fire on one side, which is the side of heat. And it's equal to the water from the other side because it has some moisture in it. It's wet. So let's summarize. So he's saying that the opposites, you have opposites to begin with, male and female, broken down into four. And the four are exclusive to each other, except that two of the four have similarities, and the other two of the four have similarities. So then how, if you have the opposites there, do we put it together? So let's see what he says. Let us summarize. He says, in other words, we have fire and water, which are total opposites. This is because one is cold and wet, while the other is hot and dry. So they can be united by the air, by the way of air. It's 1-1. Because one is cold and wet, while the other is hot and dry. They can be united by way of the air, because the air has one side of which is connected to fire because it's heat, and it has another side which is connected to water because it has moistness. So this is what connects them together. And we see that the fire and the water are connected together by air. And now let us go on with the text. And this is where we're going to stop this year. And we're going to go on and get into the text a little bit more deeply in the next year. This is Baruch Fleischman, Tikkun Elevator Kollel.